In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this fondant crown cake topper. Hi, it's Karolyn. If you want to learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes, then I would love for you to join me by hitting subscribe and the bell. A couple weeks ago, I made a cake, and I will put it over here, and it had this crown cake topper on it, and a couple people asked me how I made that, and I told you if I make it again that I will film it, and you ask and it is given. I had a request to make this crown on a cake this week, so I want to show you how I do that. Everything that I use in this video will be linked in the description below, and let's get into the video. All right, I am making this crown out of marshmallow fondant. I have a video showing how I make marshmallow fondant. I will link that below. I have a paper plate here with a little bit of shortening on a paper towel, just to wipe on the paper plate. That way the fondant isn't going to stick to the plate. So to do this, I'm going to need about 1.5 pounds of fondant. So this is marshmallow fondant. This is not, I can't work with it. I have to stick it in the microwave for it to get pliable. So what I'm going to do, put it in the microwave for about 20 seconds, flip it over, and then do another 10 to 20 seconds until it's pliable. I have cornstarch in here, and I'm going to sprinkle this down so it doesn't stick to the countertop. You want to use cornstarch and not powdered sugar, because powdered sugar will make everything sticky. All right, so I did 20 seconds on one side, and then I did another 15 seconds on the other side. And now the fondant is pliable and easy to work with. So I'm also going to get some shortening on the countertop and in my hands so the fondant doesn't stick anywhere, and just knead this together. Now I do have a little bit of Tylose powder mixed in with my fondant already. However, I want this crown to be able to really stand on its own and hold its shape. So, Tylose powder or CMC powder. Tylose is just the brand name. I actually have Wilton CMC powder in here, Gumtex powder. I just like this container, so I just keep refilling it, but I'll link it below. And a little goes a long way with Tylose powder, so I'm doing about a teaspoon on this 1.5 pounds. And just knead that together. So the Tylose powder is going to start working in the fondant, and it's going to dry a lot harder. So when I paint anything gold, I like to add gold coloring, not yellow. Yellow is just a little bright. So this is Alan Tetrialt brand. I don't think he makes this anymore. However, any gold food coloring will work. And I'll just start with about 5 drops. And knead that together, see what color I get. So I'm just going to add another 3 or 4 drops. I'll do 3 drops. Good, and this is a nice gold color. I want this to sit for about 10 minutes so the Tylose powder can start working and it can start stiffening up the fondant, and then we will continue. All right, I have my cake here, and this is iced in buttercream, and it's sitting in the refrigerator waiting for me to decorate it. What you need to do is find something that has straight edges up and down. So something that would be a good circumference depending on how wide you want your crown to be. So this salt container is good because it has straight edges on both sides. Something like this peanut butter can wouldn't do because it tapers at the bottom. So you see what I mean? You need something that is straight up and down. Now I feel like this is a little too narrow. I want something a little bigger. What I have been using is this roll of painter's tape. It just happens to be the perfect circumference. I haven't used it for painting in years, but I'm not going to put it near the cake. But it is a bigger circumference than this salt. So I just prefer to use something like this, but find something with a straight edge that's a good circumference. And I'm going to put this back in the refrigerator. All right, so what I want to do, I want to take at least 5 or 6 inch tall piece of wax paper, and I'm going to wrap it around whatever I'm going to use. It's probably going to overlap a little bit. Get a piece of tape and make a little tape tab. So turn one end over and stick it to itself. That way you can easily peel it off. And then just where it overlaps, just tape it down. Okay, and this is where the crown is going to go on the wax paper. This cylinder that I'm using is 14 inches around. So I want to make sure that I cut the crown at least 14 inches long. My fondant has been sitting for about 20 minutes. It dried a little bit too much. I'm going to pop this back in the microwave for like 10 seconds. All right, and just knead that back together. Perfect. Now it's at a workable consistency again. So I just set this down on the counter and I got some grease marks from the shortening. However, I'm going to link this below. And this is the template I'm going to use. So this is only 12.5 inches long and I need to cut it out longer. I'm going to show you what we're going to do. I want to roll this fondant out a little taller than this and a little longer than this, right? So it needs to be just tall enough so you just want to make sure it's big enough so you can cut it out. I think I over-explain things, but I want to make sure I don't leave anything out because I don't want to confuse anyone. So I'm kneading this. And then what I like to do is roll it in a little log. And now we want to make sure that you don't want this crease when we're rolling it out. So you don't want to put it down like this and roll it this way. You want the smooth top and the smooth bottom. Getting some cornstarch. Keeping the picture here for reference, I want to make sure that I'm rolling it out big enough. And when I'm doing this, I'm not rolling it out super thin. It's going to be about 1/8 of an inch thick. If you get any bubbles when you're rolling it out, I have a needle tool here. And what I like to do is go underneath the fondant, poke the needle tool up. And when you see it right underneath the bubble, poke. And then you can pop the bubble from underneath. That way it doesn't make a big hole in the fondant. And this is how thick it is. So it is about 1/8 of an inch thick. Okay, it's about 1/6 of an inch thick. Whatever. It just has to be, it can't be too thin. It can't be too thick. Just find a happy medium. All right, so I want to set this down on top. Make sure that, obviously it's not hanging off, right? It's completely on the fondant. And what I want to do is hold it down, make sure the paper doesn't shift, and start tracing. So I'm tracing the outline, and I find it easier to go from the center up, right? Instead of coming down. It's just a lot easier to trace up. And now, since I need this to be longer, I'm not tracing down this line here. So I'm going to trace the bottom part. We have this line in here, and I want to make it at just one more longer, right? So I just need one more peak over here. So I'm just going to line it up so it's perfectly lined up, and I'm just going to trace one more peak. And now I can trace down this end as well. And also this extra part on the bottom. So you see, now I got it longer than I printed it out. So if you only printed it out when it had 5 peaks, then you can move it over 2 and trace 2 more peaks, or however many more, to get it as long as you want. I hope that's not confusing. I can grab my tape measure and make sure that it is long enough, and this is just over 14 inches. Perfect. And now I'm going to cut this out. I have an X-Acto blade and I have a wet paper towel so I can keep wiping the blade off because the fondant is going to start to stick to it. And again, what I like to do is cut down part way to get the line and then cut all the way down to the board. So I'm just sawing a shallow cut in the fondant to get the line to cut and then cut all the way down. That way it's not going to drag the fondant. So just doing a shallow cut and then cutting it out. Does that make sense? And then for this line across the bottom, I just find it easier to use a pizza cutter, and I actually think I want to make it a little taller. So this is, I hope I'm not confusing you guys, but let's just cut this end off here. And I'm going to have a little border at the bottom, so it's going to cover this line that I made. I'm actually going to follow that line and just cut about a 1/2 inch below it. That was just a last minute decision. I just wanted it a little taller. I think it might look a little better. So there will be a border on the bottom, and this line is going to be hidden. So I want to carefully pull this away because it may be sticking in some parts and I don't want to ruin the peaks. And now, like always, smooth out your cuts. So I'm gently lifting this up, and I'm taking my fingers and running them up and down all of the peaks and making sure that there's no pieces. There was a piece of fondant I just threw in the sink. Like, there's pieces of fondant that stick out. There's jagged edges, and by running your fingers over it, it smooths everything out and makes the cuts look nice and pretty and perfect. And now I find this part easiest to do it on a turntable, grabbing my cylinder and placing it right in the middle. And I want to have some shortening and a paintbrush. And I'm going to wrap the fondant around the cylinder. Now, you must have Tylose powder added into your fondant. If you don't, your fondant is going to be soft and it's going to fall when you do this process. So you need to make sure that it's stiffer and it's holding its shape. So I'm going to lift this up and start to wrap it around. Right? If your fondant was soft, that process would have been a nightmare and it all would have fallen apart. Now look, this is perfect. It meets right in the back because I measured everything out and I cut it long enough. So now, to keep this in place and prevent everything from falling down, I want to take my shortening and get a little bit of shortening on a brush, and I'm going to put some shortening behind the fondant so it can stick to the wax paper. So I'm doing it on the peaks a little bit so they stick. But I do want the peaks to peel back a little bit. I don't want them to be straight up and down. I want them to lean back a little. So I just want to put the shortening like halfway up the peaks. Now, if you want your peaks to be straight, then by all means put shortening all the way to the top. But you just need enough so it can stick. You don't need too much. And then we can buff that out later. See how this is open? This is falling down way too far. So I'm just making sure that these, are they called peaks? I don't even know. Whatever they are, but I just want to make sure that they are staying in place and that I have enough shortening so it sticks and doesn't fall down. Now also, where it comes together here in the seam, while the fondant is still a little soft, you just want to make sure that your seam fits together. If it's too big, wherever the fondant overlaps, you could just take an X-Acto knife and cut straight down so the fondant meets. So that looks good. So how the peaks are just pulling a little bit away from the top. This is perfect. And now what I want to do, set this aside overnight. I make my crowns like this at least 3 or 4 days in advance before the cake is going to be picked up, so it has enough time to really solidify, right? And I want to keep an eye on it. If I see that these are peeling back too far, then I just want to get a little shortening, you know, and put it behind it so they stay in place. So keep an eye on it as it's drying. Make sure it's drying in the correct position. And I just want these to stay in place. So again, if your fondant is too soft, it's just going to fall. See how the fondant is a little moldable and it's holding its shape? That's exactly what you want. So if your fondant is not holding its shape, you need to start all over again, add some Tylose powder, knead it in, let it sit, and then start the whole process again. And I've done it before and it's super annoying. Okay, and that's good. I'm going to set this aside overnight, let it just sit out without being wrapped up. You want air to hit it. Do not put it in the refrigerator. Just let it sit out on the countertop, and then we will put on the details. All right, so I made this about 7 hours ago, and it has been sitting here wrapped around this cylinder, and I want it to dry before I go to bed. I want the whole thing to dry from the inside as well. So this is holding its shape right now, and I can't really move these pieces, so I know that it is dry enough to stand on its own. So what I want to do is remove the cylinder and kind of just peeling it off and sliding the shortening down the wax paper as I lift it off. Good. So now the seam back here looks pretty good. And I'm not going to clean this off yet. So there is some shortening on the inside and some cornstarch and everything. I just want to let it sit like this overnight so the inside of the crown can dry. If you take the cylinder out and you find that it is a little too soft, put it back in and give it a little more time to dry, and then maybe remove the cylinder the next day. This has been sitting out overnight and it is pretty hard and dry. You feel how hard this has set, so this is going to hold its shape, which is perfect. I'm taking a paper towel and I just want to wipe off the shortening that I used to stick to the cylinder. And now I want to get rid of all the cornstarch that's on the inside of this. So I just have a dry brush here and I just want to lightly, and just make sure you don't press too hard, you don't want to distort this, but I'm just brushing the cornstarch off of the inside. I want to add the details to this. I'm going to set this aside. I have the gold marshmallow fondant. I just popped it in the microwave for about 20 seconds so it's pliable. And I just want to knead this together, and I'm going to roll out a long strip, and that's going to be the border around the bottom of the crown. So whenever I want to get like a long thin strip, I'll first roll it into a long log and then flatten it out a little bit. Now, I know this is not good for video purposes. I got this little impression roller probably about 15 years ago. I have no idea what it's called, and I have no idea where I got it. So I need help from you guys. I've looked and I've tried like line impression rolling pin, and I just can't find it. So if you guys can find this, I'm going to put the top comment below asking if you know what this is, and then I will link it for you guys. But if you can't find this, there are other options. So what I'm going to do is, before I cut this out, just roll this down the entire thing, and it's just going to give like a little texture to the ribbon. If you don't have that roller, or if we can't find it, you could just completely skip this part and just have the border with no texture on it, or this will be a little more time consuming. You can take a tool like this, something with a flat edge, and just put evenly spaced lines the whole way up. It will take more time, but you can still get line impressions in it that way. So I'm sorry that I have no idea what this rolling pin is called. I'm going to keep trying to find it, and if I do, I will link it below. I have this, one of my favorite ribbon cutters. I use this in a lot of my videos. It has a lot of different pieces in it, and I'm just going to put it together so it is tall enough to go around the bottom and give me a thick enough band. And whenever you use these, you just decide how thick you want it by putting the pieces in between the two discs. I'm just going to cut a long strip out. And like always, whenever I cut any strips out, just take your fingers down the edges and smooth out the cuts. And now I don't know which molds that I want to use. I just got this one from Marvelous Molds. I love this. I can link it below. I'm going to make them in both the molds and see which one I like better. Or I got this one on Amazon. Everything will be linked below. So I have this soft fondant here. And when I use these molds, I like to get a little bit of shortening on a paintbrush and just paint the inside of the molds that I'm using. That way the fondant is not going to stick to it. You don't want too much because you don't want it to be too shiny. Just enough so that it won't stick. And I know these are silicone molds and the fondant shouldn't stick to it. However, I've done it before where the fondant does stick to it, and this just helps, it just helps release it a little easier. Now again, this fondant that I'm using does have the Tylose already mixed into it. It's the same fondant that I used to make the crown. So you need Tylose mixed in with your fondant so it's going to hold the shape and it's not going to be too soft and it's going to be a lot easier to work with. So this is going to be like a weird way, but this is just how I do it. If you have another way of doing it that works for you, by all means do it that way. So I'm going to rip off a piece that's going to be big enough to cover this and flatten it out. Put it on top, and dip my hand in the cornstarch and press it down. Make sure you press it all the way down so it's not too thick. You want the fondant to be flush with the piece, and then peel it off. And we will cut this out. So doing that again for either side. And now, like always, I want to have a wet paper towel handy so I can wipe off my X-Acto knife as the fondant starts to stick to it. What I'm doing, I'm going to cut on an angle, not straight up and down, because I don't want you to be able to see this fondant underneath that I'm cutting out. So I'm holding it on an angle and trying to cut underneath the piece. And I'm trimming the fondant around it. So can you see I'm getting my knife underneath the pattern? Right? Because if I cut it straight, then you're going to be able to see the excess fondant around it. So just getting my knife in on an angle, and I'm basically just cutting into the fondant underneath. And like always, you have jagged edges here. So I just want to take my fingers and smooth out any of the cuts so no pieces are sticking out. So I'm just pushing down these cuts in the back so you can't see them from the front. And I'm going to do the same for these other two pieces. Here's another mold. I'm going to see what this looks like. And I want to do same thing, roll it out into a log and try to flatten it out. It's best if you don't have a lot of excess fondant when you use molds like this. So as I press it down, I'm gonna lay it on top and I'm gonna try to press it down and keep it in the borders. Dipping my hand in the cornstarch, just start to push it down. Now before I did this, I just popped this fondant in the microwave for like 10 seconds. It's a little easier to do this when the fondant is soft. So I'm trying to push the fondant down so that these pieces are cutting the fondant and separating it. And now I'm just going to remove the excess pieces before I take it out of the mold. Nice. Making sure that it is pushed all the way down so I get the impression throughout the whole entire piece. Now to get this out, what I like to do, flip it over and I'm going to peel the mold back away from it rather than try to pull the fondant out. It may need a little bit of manipulation. Oh no, it doesn't, because I put on the shortening on the mold so it's easily coming out. So you see I'm pushing it down with my thumbs and pulling back with my top fingers. Beautiful. I just want to take my tools, and there's little pieces of fondant here that are sticking out, and I just want to clean up the cuts by pushing the fondant back on itself. And like I always say, this process is a little time consuming when you're cleaning the cuts. However, this is what makes your cakes look nice and pretty and perfect, is when you don't have any imperfections or any jagged edges or pieces sticking out. So now, I want to see which part of this crown that I want to be the front. So, if I put the seam in the back, then when you're looking front, when you're looking forward at the cake, you will be able to see the seam. So what I like to do is kind of put the seam over to one side, right? And I like to have the very front be an entire section rather than right here. So I'm going to turn it around and see which one that I like the best to be forward. This one forward, which brings the seam back here, I think I'm going to go with this. So this is the front of my crown. To do all of this now, I have my X-Acto knife and I have a little bit of water and a paintbrush. And I'm going to trim this little bottom band. And I want to get a little bit of water around the bottom brim of the crown so the band sticks to it. Making sure that I'm not putting the water too high. I'm just staying underneath that line that I made. And I am glad that I made this a little taller, just because there's more space now for me to put decorations on. And that was like a last minute decision, you saw. So I want to find the front again. This is the front. So if I go right back here is the back. And this is where I want to start the band. So I'm putting this down and I'm just turning the turntable with my hand as I press this around the bottom border. And where it meets in the back, just take my X-Acto knife and cut the piece off. And I just want to get a little more water behind the band and stick it down. Good. And then I'm gently pressing in. I'm not squeezing because I'm going to break the piece. Here's where I try to figure out which design I want. So do I want it to be like this, like I did before? Or see how does this look? I think I like this one. Although the girl saw the picture of this crown and asked for this one. I'm nervous to change it up. I don't know what to do. So I really like the look of this. However, the girl saw the picture of this crown and asked for this one. I think I'm just going to go with what I did before because I'm afraid if I switch it up, she's going to say, that's not what I asked for and why'd you do it differently? So, but just know, I will link this mold below. This is amazing. I love how that looks. And yeah, you could definitely use that as another option. So I'm going to get a little bit of water, not too much. You don't want it to slide off. So just enough water to make it sticky. So I'm getting low and I'm trying to find a good center. Okay, good. And now I want to take the pieces on either side and do the same thing. Get a little bit of water on the back. And I'm doing it with this little curly part up. All right, and now that I have it on there, I'm getting low. I'm eye level with this, and I want to make sure it's even. So I'm going to use, where's my Dresden tool? Don't you hate when you're working? You're like, where is this? Where is that? And I just want to make everything look nice and even and pretty. There's not enough water on the tail part of this, so I need to add a little more. So you'll see where it's not sticking. And this one looks a little higher than the other, so I'm going to try to press it down a little bit and just maneuver it into place. That way it looks even on both sides. So I'm going to pop this fondant back in the microwave for about 10 to 15 seconds to get it really pliable. All right, so the hardest part about this part is getting all the balls the same size, and I found that if I use a little scale, it makes it easier. So what I'm going to do, I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 little fondant balls, and I want them to be the same size. I have a scale here. I got this on Amazon. I can link it below. So I'm going to turn it on power, and then I can press unit until I get to grams. And I'm going to break a piece off. At first I want to roll it in a ball and see if I like the size. So I'm going to hold it up to here. That looks like a pretty good size for this. It's 3 grams. So I want to get 7 pieces of fondant that are 3 grams each. Now that I have all of them the same size, I just want to get a little bit of shortening in my hands so the fondant isn't going to stick. And just roll them all up into little balls. And now I want to get these on top. So while they are still soft, I'm just going to push it down on to the piece, trying not to distort it, right? So I don't know how to say this. I'm not squishing it down. I'm gently pushing it down on top. And then once I do that, I can take it off. See the little indent there? I'm going to put some water on there and then stick it back on. That way it's going to dry and stick to it and not fall off. And do that for all 7 pieces. Once those are all on there, I just want to get low. Like you could see some of them look like they're a little distorted. So I just want to refine them, if you will. Like some of them lost their shape a little bit as I put them on there. Good, and now I just want this to dry for, I don't know, about a half hour before I paint it gold. All right, it has been setting for, I don't know, about 20 to 30 minutes. Now I want to paint it gold. I have this Roll Comb Super Gold. I get this at sugardelights.com, and I will find it and link it below. And I have a plate. I've already painted something gold this week, so I just kept it on this plate. And I have a big paintbrush. And to do this, I'm going to use lemon extract because it evaporates super, super quick. But you can also use something like a high proof alcohol. This is Everclear. It doesn't evaporate as fast as lemon extract, so it's going to stay a little sticky for a little while longer. But yeah, it doesn't matter. Whatever one you want to use. I'm just going to go with lemon extract today. And the alcohol will evaporate out of here, so there will be no alcohol in there. So to do this, I'm going to get a little bit of this gold on the plate, and I just like to tap with the lid so it can gently start to come out. Add a little bit of the lemon extract, and I'm going to make the Friends reference. You want to make a paste, like a pair of paste pants. You don't want it too thin, and you don't want it too thick. So if you pour too much extract in here and it's too thin, wait a minute or two. The alcohol will evaporate and it'll become thicker. If it's too thick, just add a little bit more extract. I'm going to start in the center, so I'm painting from the bottom and lifting up. And this is probably going to need 2 or 3 coats of the gold. So just making sure that you cover it all, and I'm not pressing too hard. I don't want to break the piece, so I'm using a really gentle hand. Okay, once I paint the entire inside, you could still see paint strokes. This is why we have to do 2 or 3 coats in here. Then I want to get this part and make sure that the edges are all painted. And then I'm going to do the front part. And now when I'm getting in these details, I'm going to take the brush and kind of stipple it. What's it called when you do this? I'm not a painter, but I know this is a technique, and I'm kind of just trying to make sure that all of the little crevices around here have gold, even behind it where it's sticking, right? So you got to kind of move your head around, look up, look down, look underneath, and make sure you're just covering the whole thing with the gold. And painting the bottom and getting all the little balls. And the balls is something that you have to make sure you look the whole way around and you get the entire top, bottom, front, back, side. See right here, I missed a spot. That's why you gotta look all over and around. You think you painted it all, but really you probably didn't. All right, and this is what's nice about the lemon extract. So it evaporates so fast that I can start, like the inside is dry, so I can start on my next coat right away. If I used something that doesn't evaporate that fast, like the Everclear or some regular vodka, you might have to wait 10 to 15 minutes in between coats for it to dry. So I'm going to do the same thing. And for the second coat, I like to do it a little thicker. The first coat, I like to thin it out a little bit because it's easier to get the color on initially with a thinner coat. Doing the same thing again. And I like to paint in one direction also. It just makes it look a little neater. And then just turn it around and make sure, like I can go in between the seam here a little bit. And just make sure that it's all gold, that there's no unpainted pieces. And that looks really good. I'm gonna let it dry for about a half hour and then I will put it on the cake. Now I want to put the crown on top of the cake. I'm gonna show you how to do that. So this cake is just out of the refrigerator. The icing is solid. I'm not gonna mess it up when I do this process. I refrigerate all of my cakes. I have a video explaining about how to work with refrigerated cakes and I will link that below. So to attach this, I'm gonna use a little bit of piping gel. So you're gonna need piping gel and a small paintbrush. And what I wanna do is get piping gel all along the underside of the crown. So I wanna make sure that I handle the crown very gently. Be very gentle when handling the crown so I don't break it. So I want to get some piping gel on this paintbrush. And you don't want big globs of it. You just want enough to get a light coating on the bottom. I'm going to pick this up and tilt it on the side. And I am just getting piping gel all along the very bottom of the crown. And now I just want to center it. Just trying to get the front facing towards the front and making sure that it's evenly spaced around the top tier. And perfect. So I am going to put this back in the refrigerator. The piping gel will stiffen up a little bit and it's really going to hold it against the top part of that cake, and then I'll finish decorating it. But there is your gold crown cake topper. So there you go. There is the fondant gold crown cake topper. The two most important things in this is, number one, you got to use a lot of Tylose powder. You have to make sure that your fondant is going to dry hard and hold its shape and not fall apart. Number two, you have to find a cylinder that is going to be the perfect size for your cake. And I keep that roll of tape and I pretty much use that all the time. If you find a cylinder that you like, just hold on to it forever. And you can just keep reusing it by wrapping wax paper around it. So I will put the final product over here. And this is 5-inch and 7-inch tiers. It feeds about 25 to 30 people. And she was very specific, said she just wanted a tan cake, wanted the crown on the top and the gold name and lettering, and then the edible image on the bottom. So I can't think of anything else. I'll probably think of something else after I finish editing the video, but that's what usually happens anyway. If you guys have any questions or comments, leave them below. And you can follow me on social media and I have my website. Everything is listed in the description below as well. And if you want to stick around, you can watch these 2 videos next and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Please like this video if you liked it. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, it's cake. Have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.